It's live streaming. I call special budget committee meeting of today to order. We'll start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, grant that we who would seek to serve you may have the wisdom of your Spirit, the guiding of your hand, and the grace to serve together for the prosperity of the city of the Gold Coast, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Right. So, item 1, attendant apologies, everyone's here. Leave of absence, nil. Confirmation of minutes. Councillors, any corrections? Okay, someone like to move for adoption? Councillor Caldwell. Second, Councillor Gates. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried. Conflict of interest declaration. None. Nil. We move on. Is this a committee forward planning? Nothing. That's nothing there. Item 5, nothing. Item 6, draft corporate plan. After speaking with the CEO, we've got to deal with it before we actually deal with the draft budget. That's the order of proceedings. So, where is it now? Draft budget. Item 6 in there? Okay. So, on page 21, have we got presentation? Okay, thank you. What we got? Okay, new corporate plan.
Yep. Good morning. The purpose of this report is to provide you with an overview of the consultation on the draft corporate plan that went out to consultation in May, and consider proposed amendments to the Gold Coast 2032, aspirations and themes, and the draft corporate plan. What I want to do first is take you through the consultation results. You have got the consultation full report there in front of you. It's quite comprehensive. Just take you through the high-level results, so we can kind of set in context the changes we're proposing to the corporate plan. So in terms of the community consultation, obviously we went out to the citywide consultation through our normal Have Your Say panel. There was a lot of social media, Facebook, and a whole range of platforms used as normal as part of that consultation. It was completed in-house by our corporate communications team. And as a result of that consultation, we had over 1,000 survey responses, which was what we'd been hoping for. We also had a Junior Youth Council event as well. We took advantage of on the 4th of May and had, as part of their World Cafe workshops. So in terms of the community consultation, the citywide survey, in terms of the themes for the Gold Coast 2032 and the corporate plan, these were the themes that came into the top 3. So naturally unique, livable places and vibrant lifestyle. The community rated these as the top 3 of our 6 themes in our draft corporate plan. And in terms of the reach, I think there was over 373,000 people reached as part of this engagement. So quite a big reach for this campaign. In terms of the outcome priorities, obviously there's 15 outcomes in the corporate plan. These were the top 5 that people rated as most important to them. And we have beaches, parklands and waterways and natural places absolutely came out on top, not just for this overall consultation, but when you start to look at some of the breakdown across the city, people rated this outcome very highly. And I think it goes to the heart of what people enjoy about the city in terms of all their open spaces and opportunities. You can see the other top 5 there, being safe and active, balancing city growth and the environment, managing resources and critical nature corridors. They came up as the top 5. Having said that, all the outcomes were important and people did rate them differently across the city, and I think from the consultation report you can probably see that for individual parts of the city, north, south, east and west, there are some differences that appear across the city, but these were the overall results. There was an open question around what other priorities do you have for the city, and this asked two pieces, and I think one was requested at the last council meeting, which was to ask about two things: priorities for the city and any feedback or alternatives and measures of success, and we put that into the question. And this was the qualitative feedback that came through. So of the 1,000 responses we had in the survey, 599 people actually responded on the open question, and these were the feedback they gave in terms of their top issues and priorities for the city. So as you can see, development came up there as top, and then we had environmental protection, public transport, climate change resilience planning, active sustainable travel, planning for population growth, and then housing affordability and traffic flows. So there was a number that were quite similar in nature, and we've tried to look at those across those themes and bring to the table, I guess, for consideration some of the top 4 issues that actually have come through that qualitative feedback.
Let's go all the way to the end. Thank you.
In terms of
just
the...
note slide 5. Not confidential.
From the Junior Youth Council, we had about 70 participants on that day for the workshop, and it was a series of workshops that took place on that day, not just on the corporate plan. The top themes are before you: climate change, cost of living, tertiary education, accessible public transport. So those were their top 4 themes from the Junior Youth Council. So in terms of the qualitative feedback from the Junior Youth Council and the community as a whole, these were the top things we thought really needed to be considered as part of any changes to the corporate plan. So first one is transport, and you can see there are a variety of comments made from the community and youth around transport. In terms of this particular feedback, currently we feel that because we do have a transport strategy and it's under review, that all of those issues can be addressed through that mechanism that already exists, and there are already outcomes in the corporate plan that relate to transport. So we're not proposing any changes for transport at this stage, but obviously all the results of the consultation will go to the transport team, and so they can consider those as part of that review. In terms of environmental protection, again, we have an Our Natural City strategy, and we have a number of plans and programmes already in progress across the city. So again, that feedback is going to go to the Our Natural City team to actually consider any changes that need to be made as part of their review of their strategy. So again, we're not proposing any changes to that, but really recommending that they incorporate this feedback into their work. In relation to city development and climate change, we are proposing 2 changes, and I'll take you through those. In terms of city development, one of the big areas of feedback was, particularly from the Youth Council, but also from the general community, was around housing and affordability and the population growth. So one of the things we're proposing is, under the livable places theme, that we actually pull that out and be more specific around that outcome and talk about planning city growth to have sufficient capacity and types of housing to meet future needs. Now, that work is already underway in the city, but it's actually calling this out as a priority for our plan. In relation to climate change, we already have an outcome around climate mitigation and adaptation in the corporate plan under resilience, under the livable places theme. There was a fair bit of feedback about planning for the city, so we're proposing that we pull a new outcome into the One City theme around addressing climate change challenges through practical solutions. And that One City theme is really about the city working together collaboratively. It's about partnerships. It's about recognising that it's going to take all areas of the city to address that together. So it's a partnership approach. So in terms of the Gold Coast 2032, these are the areas of change. So we're highlighting these on the screen for you. There are some changes to the visuals. We've changed the icon around thriving economy. In terms of connected community, we've changed the wording slightly. Attachment 2 actually goes through all the wording changes in detail, but we've talking about supporting our lifestyle rather than choice of lifestyle. In terms of One City, we've changed that wording to reflect more about partnerships and advocacy, and the fact that the city needs to actually be working together, but obviously advocating to all levels of government and other peak bodies in terms of addressing our challenges and opportunities. In terms of the council plan, and that's probably the biggest change we're proposing to make, and one of the bigger changes, we have been calling this the draft corporate plan. We're proposing to change the name to council plan. Now that's really to reflect, I guess, the intent of the plan. One of the bits of feedback we had on the corporate plan was that people didn't always understand what the corporate plan was, and they thought it might be more about the organisation, not the city. So we're changing it to council plan to reflect that it's an outwardly facing plan. It's council's plan for the next 5 years. Other changes in there include a slight move of one of the outcomes on the left there, moving the best place to live just down the list, so it hasn't changed at all, just moved placement. We've added a couple of measures around community infrastructure, accessibility, visitation, and satisfaction with arts and culture. We've added an outcome and a new measure, on digital connectivity, and that's talking about next generation connectivity in the city. We've added the livable places theme around city growth to ensure housing supply and capacity, and we've actually added, changed slightly the residential growth measure and also the resource and recovery waste measure. We've just renamed that. In terms of one city, we've added the climate change outcome we talked about and added a measure to support that. So those are the proposed changes. In terms of the Gold Coast Water and Waste performance plans here and objectives and significant business activities, that's just a grammatical change. A comma was added to that slide. In terms of measures of success, we've made some changes, as I described earlier. These are currently our measures of success, and in the attachment you'll have not only the measures, but the baselines and targets. Some of these measures are new, about 50% of them are new measures, and we're looking to establish baselines in the first year of council plan, and targets. So we'll be setting those as we go through the year. We're not currently measuring some of those aspects. In terms of publication, should the council plan be adopted, it will be published on the city's website, and we'll be linking to existing web content. Now, the form of the document means we'll be able to, as part of the annual review, update this in a really timely manner. The other thing that has come through the feedback is our previous corporate plan, trying to open that on smart devices was practically impossible. This will be able to open on all smart devices, so we're looking at whether it's phones or other smart tablets. So we're actually looking to try and improve accessibility to this documentation and to the plan. The revised web pages, if approved, will go live on the 1st of July. In terms of what happens from here, if the corporate plan obviously is adopted, we'll be looking then to augment that investment schedule. We currently have in the city operational plan significant activities for the year ahead for the corporate plan. I think we have 113 million, 43 activities. We're going to be building that out in terms of the 5-year picture through our CapEx, OpEx programs, working with the organisation. We'll also be bringing back to you the process for that annual review, and there'll be progress reporting on a quarterly basis to council. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you go back to slide 5, please?
Yes. Hang on.
Anyone got any question before slide 5? Yep. Okay. Councillor Caldwell.
My question just related to the data and whether it was, whether we were able to measure it in a way that makes it statistically accurate. So, for example, do we know the age and, you know, job or interests of the people that gave the survey results so that we can actually normalise the data and verify that it's an accurate representation of the city?
In terms of the data, obviously it's gone through the Have Your Say panel, which we use as a routine across the city. So this hasn't gone through any different process to our normal surveys. Yeah. There are obviously, I think, over 25,000 people on the panel, and it will have gone to panel members, but others may have completed it, and some of those people will be within the city, some will be outside the city. It isn't just restricted to our city. In terms of age and location, obviously you'll see in the back of the report there are some location-specific data in there, in terms of back down to postcodes, but obviously it does depend whether people fill that data in, so we can't require them to fill in the age and gender. Those things we ask to collect, but we can't necessarily require that every time they do a survey. But we do hope that we get a fairly good response to that, yes.
So I'm just concerned that it's not statistically robust or defensible. If, for example, I don't know, one particular, I was going to say hockey club in Labrador, but I won't say that, one particular soccer club in Runaway Bay says, well, we are really concerned about the environment because our fields continue to flood. How do we know that the data's not skewed so that we're getting a particularly weighted, or distorted, is it? Yeah, distorted view of the data.
Through the Mayor. I think that The surveys, I say, is what we are doing routinely as a city. If we wanted to get statistically significant by age and gender, we would have need to run a completely different process for that, probably through an outsourced agency. This is been running through our corporate comms branch. We have got breakdowns by age and gender. We can certainly provide you with a view about statistical significance. In terms of the number of surveys, there are over 1,000 here. I know that if we're looking at a population, the population we have, if you were going to stratify that by age and gender for the city, you'd probably be looking about 400 to 500 responses. So this is double that number, but in terms of responses, there will be people outside the city, as there are for all our engagements, and there will be different portions of the city represented. So, for instance, we may get more responses from the north or the west, the south and the east. So, and that's been something that we've been working with as a city, I guess, in terms of the process for communication or consultation for some time in using that panel. So it isn't representative necessarily of our population by age, gender, quadrant and division.
So, and just at the outset of the data, I have some concerns about that because it seems to me that it's very, very heavily skewed in a certain direction of response, which I can't substantiate through this data as being reflective of the actual views of a portion of the, like a reflective portion of the 650,000 people that live in our city.
Yeah.
So that's my concern at the outset.
Yeah. So I'll follow up from that concern then to the CEO. This is before us today to drill further and say in 12 months' time to adopt the next 5 years corporate plan. I mean, you can revise. So what I'm getting at, Mr. CEO, the pathway there, we can have drill further data or even use other outside consultancy or whatever it may be. My point is we can have this 5-year plan review in 12 months' time. Am I right? No need. It's all right, mate.
Yeah, through you, yes, Mr. Mayor. If I just make one other point, I think the other thing to consider in relation to this work is that this was the final step of review. We didn't build the plan based on this single piece of consultation, really, and notwithstanding that, what this consultation did say is it was broadly supportive and consistent with the views that were captured in the plan and the process that's been ongoing now for about 6 or 8 months.
Okay. Councillor Vorster.
I'm going to stand, Mr. Mayor.
No need. Committee, I'm happy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have similar concerns to Councillor Caldwell, but I'll just ask a few questions that are different, sufficiently different as to not raise your ire. I'm very, very intrigued by the suggestion that we have not captured a broadly representative view of the Gold Coast based on the number of potential outside submissions and also the breakdown of geographic quadrant. So, for example, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, through you to Sarah, but from what I understand, only 3% of responses came from the Western quadrant. 3%. Is that right?
I would have to check, but yes, absolutely, it's in there. If it's in the report, absolutely. Yeah. There are differences between segments, absolutely.
So I think when we're looking at the corpus of submissions from within the city, and 1/4 of the city is only represented by 3% of submissions, that for me begins to raise some alarm bells. And I'm not suggesting that the process is wrong. What I'm suggesting is perhaps the weight we give to this process in terms of changes to the plan is wrong. So it could be that between now and full council, we've got some pared back potential changes. This is just my thinking.
Yeah, but just let me just put I'm not saying what you're saying is incorrect, but decisions are made by those who turn up. So, just saying with what's before us, with have your say scenario, those who are interested, we've taken on board their comment, and those who are happy, everything's good, well, that's where we're at.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think quite often, for example, with planning or development application decisions, if we had to take that approach, in my view, next to nothing would progress in the city, because the number of dissenting submissions to a development application always outweigh the number of positive submissions. So instead, for me, it's about looking at the number of submissions, say it's 178 for a development in Palm Beach, for example, against the number of people who live across the Gold Coast and the merit of the arguments that are being put forward. So if I take the approach I use with a planning application to the approach I take here, notwithstanding the fact that only those who turn up make decisions, I still think we can't ignore it. My personal view. Do we have a sense, Mr Mayor, through you to Sarah, of the 1,000 odd submissions, how many came from outside of the city?
I would have to take that question on notice because it would, yeah.
Okay, so there is a table though, and perhaps you can point me to the page because I've lost it, which shows the number of submissions per quadrant. Let's have a look.
Yes.
Page 58. Okay, so I'm just trying to understand then on page 57. So this suggests to me that we received 979 submissions from within the city, but you're saying we received just over 1,000 overall.
Yes.
So it's only about 10% from out of the city, which is reassuring. Did we discount what those outsiders said, or did we include that?
We've included those responses in here in terms of some of those people may have used, I guess, have addresses outside the city, have businesses in the city. So it's hard to actually ascertain, I guess, their role in the city. They may still have a vital role in terms of city, in terms of the city and their residency here or their engagement with it.
Right. Mr Mayor, you may recall, well, we've heard today that this was primarily pushed through our city plan, sorry, not our city plan, GC Have You Say platform. And similarly, councillors were encouraged to get their communities to participate in the process. Good to see Robina there with 76 responses, for example. And Varsity, what an engaged community.
Heavily weighted Robina here. A bit nervous here.
But, Mr Mayor, I just wonder through you to Sarah, or perhaps better through you to the CEO, whether our web services team can have a look at the referrer URLs that drove traffic to the actual survey page. So, for example, if I visit, the GC Have Your Say /corporate plan website because I've clicked a link in an email, the fact that I've clicked that specific link should be recorded in our web logs and give us an idea of who or which community groups may have driven traffic to the survey. And I'm interested in that because, I asked my community to have their say on social media. Obviously, they've responded. But if there are community groups with vested interests or a particular lens driving traffic to the GC Have Your Say, what I would want to see is how they sold the opportunity to participate before I rely on those submissions. So, for example, not putting high-rises on the beach. I don't know, it doesn't seem as though it was one of the dimensions of the corporate plan that we were canvassing. It strikes me it might have been driven elsewhere. So, Mr Mayor, through you to the CEO, would it be possible to get that breakdown between now and full council?
So, yes, we can do that. The other point I would make and reinforce again is that this is a piece of information that was used to drive these changes, not the only piece of information. And I think it should be seen as being interesting. It's a piece of data that was used in the mix. It's not the sole determining factor on the changes that were proposed for the final version. And I think, Mr Mayor, it might be worth Sarah just talking to what are some of the other data points that were used in order to make these changes. Because I think if there's a perception that we just took this as a straw poll on the plan and made changes directly in that, that is not the case.
No. So, Mr Mayor, just to give the CEO some comfort, I don't labour under that assumption whatsoever.
Good.
And in fact, when I read the report, what I would give most weight to is that livability survey, which was actually statistically robust, which talked a lot about easing traffic congestion, for example. But what makes me inherently suspicious, not that I'm saying there's a conspiracy, but the things that make me question the interpretation of the data and how it's sort of filtered down into the corporate plan is there doesn't seem to be talk of easing congestion and lowering traffic times, which I understand to be a priority of my community. We just have a single bullet point in the corporate plan that talks about travel time reliability. Now, I can reliably travel to my kids' kindergarten. It takes me an hour to go 3 kilometres. I can reliably do that. It'll take me an hour every day. But my sense is that the community wants that commute cut shorter. And when I look at this qualitative feedback, I'm not seeing that borne out. I mean, to see roads and parking together rate 4% of mentions just, confuses me. Anyway, just lastly, Mr Mayor, perhaps through you to the city solicitor.
How about I'll get Sarah to respond?
Oh, up to you,
that,
of course.
I'll come back to you. There are other pieces that you used.
Thank you. I think through the Mayor, I think one of the other pieces was the report that was referred to earlier, which was the Community Views Report 2021, where housing was identified as an example as the top issue to improve for the city through that survey. So that's the rationale, one of the rationales for including housing in there. Not only did it come up in this feedback, but it came up as part of that survey, which you're right, was statistically significant run through that external agency. So in terms of the housing piece, I think that's where we are. In terms of transport, I'll just address the question about reliability. So the measure on reliability, I know there's a bit more detail in the report. That's actually measuring 8 key strategic road corridors, 2 directions of travel, 2 peak periods, 6 to 10, 3 to 7, and they've got 8 road corridors. Christine Avenue, Robina Parkway, Macquarie Street, Sunshine Boulevard, Gold Coast Highway, Ashmore Road, the Gold Coast Highway, Southport to Main Beach and Uwalpa Road. So there is very specific measurements here for these metrics, which have all been developed to support the plan. And obviously the council can consider those as we go forward, and if there's additional metrics that are needed, absolutely, those can be considered. In terms of the outcome relating to the proposed change for climate change. Obviously, resilience is clearly in our plan already, and it has been since the draft was developed. It was more the planning that was we felt needed to be incorporated into the plan. Now, the city is doing an awful lot of work on that already. We have a coastal adaptation plan. There's been work on carbon abatement. Obviously, it's come through the survey, and I think in terms of the feedback, I recognise the numbers, but in terms of the north, south, east and west feedback on the themes, the open question, the 4 top are very similar regardless of the number of responses for those 4 quadrants of the city. There is quite a bit of overlap in those. And for example, the climate one came up in the top 4 for all quadrants of the city in that space. But the city's already doing a lot in that space.
Yep. So Ms Mayor, I just had one question, but if I could just clarify on the greenhouse gases. I've no problem with climate resilience. Absolutely no problem. You know, just look at what's happening with our sports fields at the moment. Councillor Caldwell referred to that. We need to make sure that we can respond to drought, fire, flood, not only to protect property but life. Totally get that. But a move to greenhouse gas emissions, for me, is a quantum leap in terms of our response as a city. It's like in an order of magnitude more significant than any of the other proposed changes in the corporate plan. We don't have a national strategy. The state government's one is in flux. So to put into our corporate plan effectively a push towards net zero, which I take it to be, is inordinately more significant than elsewhere. So anyway, that's on greenhouse gases.
Yeah, just pause
Please.
there, then I'll come back.
So,
Mr CEO?
So, with respect, Councillor, I think you've made a quantum leap to net zero. That's not what's in the plan. The plan is deliberately, I don't want to say vague, but it's deliberately open to the question about what that measure should be about greenhouse gas emissions. It's just saying it's a placeholder to say now we need to go away and do some work and find out what the right target is for the city. So I accept what you've said, that there is a shift in the plan, and to put it in there is a step, but it's not quite the leap that I think you've just described. We're not suggesting net zero for the city now. What we're saying is that we need a measure there, and we need to do the work to figure out what that target should be for the city.
Right. Thanks, Mr.
And that will probably require some better direction from Canberra over the next few months.
So Through you, Mr Mayor, I just want to thank the CEO for that. I think that's precisely the message that needs to appear on that slide and not need further explanation. And my last question, which really talks to that, is, Mr Mayor, through you to the City Solicitor. The corporate plan is the overarching policy document for the council, and all strategies and plans, as I understand it, have to align with the corporate plan. Corporate plan is a statutory document, requires consultation. When council makes a decision that does not align with a policy, we're required in our resolution to explain why we have made a decision contrary to policy. So if we're confronted with a decision about, let's say, beach bars, right, to what extent do we need to be dealing with a decision on that when the corporate plan might prioritise, say, open and free access to our beaches? Do decisions that jar with the corporate plan require clarification in resolution, or is it merely the policies themselves?
Mr CEO?
I'll go first, if that's right. So I think by its very nature, corporate plans of this kind have priorities that compete with each other, because equally, you've raised the beach bars. I could point to a thriving economy as a pillar that we would use to justify or to align to the strategy. So I don't think it's quite as simple as saying, oh, by having X, then you can't do Y. If you would be aware, and councillors would be aware, that all papers have alignment to strategy written in them, and we will be continuing to do that. It's just that this time we will have a new set of pillars for which we align to. But that's the nature of corporate planning. There are always objectives that compete with each other, and it's the role of council, on advice from us, to make a decision about which priority you want to prioritise.
So, Mr Mayor, I'm super keen to ensure that the very good contribution made by the CEO today in response to my questions is actually captured in the document and on the slides to manage community expectation. Because my great worry is that we have an obligation under the Local Government Act and local government principles to consult and implement policies in accordance with the community's expectations through consultation. I wouldn't want any bullet point to be misconstrued by particular community groups to tie us up to specific obligations and then face criticism or complaint if we're not living up to it. So if the move towards greenhouse gas emission tracking is merely about council understanding its appetite to act in that space, and if the corporate plan acknowledges that there are competing priorities that will be held in tension, then I'm much more comfortable than being stuck on any black and white bullet point. Thank you.
Do we want to add that into it now?
Yeah. So through you, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to go away and ensure that that's reflected.
What I'm saying is we can add it as item 8.
Yep. Okay.
You know, and so, councillors, what I'm saying to the CEO is when we go to recommendation, we'll add an item 8 to reflect those comments, so that when we actually take the recommendation to the vote, it's reflected. So if you can draft some of that, we'll have a 5-minute break or whatever. I'm sure this is going to run over for lunch and all that sort of stuff. So plenty of time, but we'll get it right. So it's the time to do it, and that gives us the overarching recommendation so that we can adopt and have some flexibility. Councillor Peter Young.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I had a question about slide 5, but I think we've got to the point of debate now, and in the context of the matter that's been discussed already, that being greenhouse gas emissions and climate change resilience and so forth, I think it's relevant to note that this graph is teal, and in the context of the recent federal election, I think the message is quite clear from the broader community across the nation that they want some action and on climate change issues. And I remind councillors that this council, in fact, had a policy and a strategy to achieve carbon emission zero status by 2018, and that was subsequently abandoned. So there's nothing wrong with us being proactive in this space, and so I would be I'll be very attentive to whatever motion comes forward out of this conversation and implied direction to the CEO or change as in contrast with what's been presented to us today. You know, I have no discomfort whatsoever with the material that was presented, but I may have some discomfort with a proposed change.
Yeah, but that's what democracy is all about, and
Yep.
I'm sure everyone's looking towards that. But regarding the colour, this has been our city colour. I think those teal people hop on the bandwagon because we're one of the greenest mayor in all the land. I mean, council and all that. Some say. So, you know, success has many fathers and mothers, and as you can see, they see the Gold Coast, second largest budget council in all of the land, and they love I'm saying it because that's what it is. But anyhow, I'll go to Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First, a question regarding the outcome priorities that we've got on page 23. So with the second one, we've got, we are a safe, active and healthy community. If I had 3 questions, do I want a safe community, an active community, or a healthy community, and prioritise those? They're all incredibly different. So when someone answers that, how do I know if they're thinking, oh yes, safe, thank you, or oh yes, active? It seems a lot in one point, and my concern with it is whatever the underlying intent actually gets missed.
Through the mayor. I think when people were talking about, when we originally talked to yourselves and others about the corporate plan as we drafted this, and then obviously the consultation, one of the things that came through was people connected very much being active and healthy with being safe, because being out and about in the city, one of the things we talked about earlier was the top outcome was around being out and about beaches, parks and natural areas. For people to feel safe, to be able to be active and healthy, for a lot of them, they need to feel safe being out and about, particularly alone. One of the questions about being out and about at night is that people don't always feel safe at night, but they do feel safe in their neighbourhoods. And one of the measures we have in the corporate plan is about feeling safe in your neighbourhood. Being safe in your neighbourhood has a really strong connection with being able to be out, active, and being healthy. And so whilst there are, yes, absolutely different concepts, and no doubt if you ask those 3 questions separately, people might rate them differently. Okay. There's a very strong connection between those in terms of lifestyle.
So
but the priority would be the safety. I mean,
yeah, that's what I hear, and that's what I would have expected, but it's not actually what was written. So I'll assume that's effectively safety, which means you can go outside, which is correct. Pretty obvious. Okay, thank you. The second thing, I just wanted through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CEO, who's made the comment that this is just a piece at the end. I'd have to say 2 years in the job, I'm pretty frustrated that I seem to have conversations at every single time we are doing some kind of research methodology on the fact that we don't have a rigorous, independent research methodology. On some things, that's okay, and have your say certainly has its place. But for something like this that's going to define where we go, to say, oh, look, it's a thing right at the end, that's not okay. We have been raising these issues for a while. I don't understand why, you know, the first thing you come up and say is that this isn't representative. Well, what is the point of it then? So it is, there's a significant amount of funding and energy and allocation that's gone into this. A little bit more to make sure that the data is accurate would have been helpful. So that's my comment on that.
Yeah, no, just pause there. I mean, the CEO...
I'm happy to respond.
I want to allow him to respond.
Okay,
at the same time, you know, he just walked through the door and taken the seat of the CEO.
Thank you.
You know, it's not... I'm pretty sure that he's uncovering things that you've had 2 years to see.
Understand.
But over to you.
Well, I guess my simple answer, Councillor, is I think it's a point well made, and I will add it to the list of things that I'm looking at the moment. But I think you're right. I also think it's important to remember, as you've indicated, there are times when you want the highly expensive, detailed consultation with very rigorous methodology, and there are other times when you don't. So I think I accept and acknowledge that further work's required in this space, and it goes on the list.
Okay.
And sorry.
Yeah,
Matt.
go ahead.
Okay, just the third final point, just to follow up on my question regarding the climate change. Sorry, my understanding is this is the first time we've seen that language in documents. So could you just tell me what you mean by that?
In terms of...
Because when you say climate resilience, I understand, but climate change kind of occurs a whole world of other stuff. So when I see the word climate change in there, what am I meant to understand that you mean?
Through the Mayor. This outcome is really about addressing the challenges facing the city specifically, and some of those the council has already considered. So, for instance, coastal adaptation, you already have a coastal adaptation plan. Carbon abatement, we know, has already been considered by council. So it's about identifying those challenges, but also opportunities facing the city. There may be opportunities in the economic space. So it's really about looking forward and those challenges and opportunities that may present themselves, and how the city will work with partners across the city to address those. So that's what I meant by that outcome. And obviously it is a late entry in terms of this particular plan based on the community feedback, and further work's going to need to be done to actually work through what actions. But I know that the recommendation on the outcome talks about practical actions. So we're talking about what can the city do in a practical way to actually address those opportunities and risks that may be facing the city. And some of those are already in train.
Yeah,
Okay,
just pause a second. On the climate change, it was first raised, I think, from memory, 2013 budget. There was a line item there, and I recall that to do a climate change report. I'm not sure whether it's over 2 years or whatever it is. It was around $1.3 million. And I looked at it, had the same similar thought process as you're having now. And I just wrote out and said the climate will change next year, end of report, and we crossed it out. So I think it's a lot more appropriate that it is climate resilient. That's what we're interested on. So if you can take that on board, and you know, it's a good pickup. I mean, okay, Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do question some of these percentages, but I mean, that's the information before us, and so we need to, I suppose, be guided by it. I wanted to, this sounds very minor and picky, but on page 108, is there an intention to include those city aspiration statements as part of the new plan? Will those statements be presented in the way that they are right there?
Through the Mayor. Yes, the intention is they are attached to Gold Coast 2032, and they provide more depth about the city vision and what's meant by the city vision. They came to council, I think, the last time around, and have been out to the community. Yeah. So yes.
Okay, so I'm embarrassed to tell you, but you just need to take out an apostrophe in the naturally unique part, so that it doesn't say it is rather than just it's. Our city values it's healthy. If you could just remove that apostrophe.
Thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's done. It's good. We want that. You know, I couldn't pick that up. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. So I just wanted to touch on this resilience, and to me it's about actually quantifying the practical things the city can do. So I'll look at what we've done to date and whether or not it is gas capture from our landfill, or if it's solar panels that we're installing to reduce the consumption, or if it's just the fundamental reason why we're backing light rail is modal shift to get people out of cars and away from road sewers and into a more sensible way to move people around a city. So to me, I don't think we should necessarily be afraid of the words, climate change or climate resilience or however you package it. To me, it's about explaining what are the things that this city can actually do and how are we doing them, and emphasising that. So that as long as that's the direction we're heading in, I think that's the right direction. Mm-hmm. In terms of the community consultation, the qualitative feedback, I pick up on what Councillor Vorster said in regards to 4% or 3% coming from the Western Quadrant. I think the reality is that the top, 5 or 10 aren't too big a surprise, regardless of where they've come from. So I think we represent a quarter of the city each, and so we've all got, I think I had about 50 or so submissions that appear to have come from the suburbs that I represent, which is slightly less than I think Councillor Vorster accommodated twice that number from the area that he led. So, but I think that we just need to accept the data that's before us and see how we can make it work. Mr. Mayor, I had a question in regards to page 100.
Yeah, and just before you go to the question, which we will go there, I just want to add to some of the items you mentioned regarding things we've done for climate resilience or change. On top of that is a major resource and volunteers that I think Councillor Vorster about to tell me, it's around 650,000 trees in 2 terms. And and we'll continue with that. And I think that's quite a significant thing that we do. And the move to have open space dedicated from our city above 50% of green space, and how part of the planning and that, I think we have really picked our game up regarding climate resilience / change. And so I don't want viewers out there feel that it was only a gesture that we put solar panels on 43 of our buildings. Pimplemar Pool is off the grid on all the and all that, and we're spending a lot of money on our recycle and initiatives, and we're going to do a lot more. So as far as climate resilience is concerned, as a council, I'm pleased that you flagged it, and that we'll go much further than before. I think the concern is that the debates on climate change worldwide, it's more so on global warming and all that sort of stuff. And as Councillor Vorster pointed out, that's not quite in our space until the federal government makes decisions and state government follow on with that, and then us, the third tier of government, will do our input. In the interim, we'll do what we can already to make sure that our lifestyle is continue, and that we are very responsible. So I just want to add to that, as you add to the wording of climate change or climate resilient. So as we move forward together, I think we'll outline even clearer the path, the journey we're taking forward.
No, and it's our tree canopies and all of that type of stuff. So that's all about reducing heat sinks and all of that.
So what, page 100?
Page 100. It was just a question in regards to, there's some words there around confident and proud, and we love the Yugambeh country for its culture and heritage. And I just wanted to make sure that we got that right. My understanding it was Yugambeh language group, but the country actually isn't Yugambeh. So I think that we just need to be really careful, because I think that we've actually got, so the majority of the Gold Coast may be Kumamberi land, but so I just think that it's the right direction, and clearly I have a personal view that we're going to be in this space a lot in the next couple of years at a federal level, but I think that it would be it would be disappointing if we made a mistake in regards to not getting the words right, because it's a language group, not you can bear land.
Yeah.
To the Mayor, we'll review that and check that before next week.
All right. Councillor Corwell?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. There was the slide that's on page 109, which you had one that had red boxes around what had been amended on the screen.
I'll move to it.
Okay.
Was it 10?
Yeah.
You want to take a break?
No.
Yeah, that one. So I was just, and this sort of goes to what the CEO mentioned before, but the citywide greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of it being a measure of success, how are we actually going to frame that? I don't know whether we should be setting an expectation that we're going to start measuring that. I don't know how much that would cost or whether we even have the capacity to do it. So I just think we should be a bit careful about that. And it sort of follows on from what Councillor Owen Jones said, that maybe there's better, more deliverable measurements, if you like.
Yeah, just pause. Paul, do you want to come up there for a minute? Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we don't actually measure greenhouse gas emissions or carbon. You actually plug in a number of formulas and calculate it, and it's based on energy usage or how many vehicles and kilometres you travel, etc., etc. So it's a relatively benign and low-cost approach, but it is a defined framework with formulas that are established by state, federal government, etc., etc.
So, Director Heaton, then, does it mean it's like a benchmark? Let's say you did one this year, and same formula, and all, and with all the work that you try to achieve, and whatever parameters, and then you plug in the same thing, and you just do basically another health check against the previous benchmark. Is that the how we can measure it on that?
That's essentially it, Mr Mayor. We currently report greenhouse gas emissions for the water and sewage business because we are required to under national environmental regulations. So we already do it for half the business. So again, and we do that on an annual basis, and that is actually published publicly.
So sorry, when you say half the business, as in that's council controlled?
That's correct.
Business, yeah. But is this city? This is whole of city. This bullet point that measures greenhouse gases.
Look, I think it is, but again, it's simply formula driven.
Yeah, okay.
It would be the same. We're not. There's nobody goes out and actually measures greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay. I mean, obviously we're in open at the moment, so there'll be people at home thinking that, we're going to start dropping pipes out of the ground or something and measure what's going on in the atmosphere or whatever. So
no. And it takes into account, as we've talked about active travel, how many people are working on, using the public transport versus vehicles.
And sorry, so what's in the basket of greenhouse gases?
What's in the basket of greenhouse gases? Well, carbon,
it's a bit of a sort of, I don't know, layman's term, I suppose. So what do we actually? What's a greenhouse gas?
There's a large basket. The biggest is carbon dioxide, and essentially the reporting mechanism is in carbon dioxide equivalents or carbon equivalents. Now I'll get it wrong. I'm trying to think of methane is a large greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
And methane, for example, is 30 times worse per volume than carbon dioxide in terms of it being a greenhouse gas.
Wow.
So, for example, methane...
Doesn't get a lot of airtime.
No, it doesn't. Which is the problem. Methane is significant from our landfills and from our treatment plants. And then there's nitrous oxide, which is also produced from our treatment plants, and that is 300 times more significant per weight than carbon dioxide.
So we could actually, if we tweak some of the things that we literally can control ourselves, it actually has a multiplier effect of 10 times or 300 times if we start reducing those impacts.
That's exactly right.
Very good value for action. Thank you.
Yeah, so just adding to the director's comments, so where the meat hits the bone, though, councillor, or the rubber hits the road, I should say, is wrong saying, is in targets, in the target. That's the point.
Lunchtime.
So, yeah. So it's the development of the target for the city and for the city administration, which is where we're going to get. So we mentioned net zero, when the city would be willing to or able to get to net zero. That's the kind of work that we need to do. But a lot of that will be driven by the federal discussions, as Councillor Voster mentioned. So at this stage, we're putting a place marker to say that there's more work to be done here, and that is reflected in the plan. Okay. Sorry for the mixed metaphors.
Councillor Voster?
Oh, sorry, Mr Mayor, I was just flagging that I shot through to you as the chair some proposed words just for your...
All right.
But nothing that we need to address until after the break, perhaps.
Yeah, no worries. How about, can you send it to Minute Taker?
Sure.
And then can put up on the screen while we have a break, and then people can think around it? With that in mind, I've got to go to Councillor Gates because I said I would.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. I remember when we first reviewed this and I queried that last dot point that says average residential rate rise, because I don't get what that means. Like I had suggested at the time that we could say disciplined residential rates rise, which kind of gives the indication that we're not going to go crazy and give a massive rates rise. But what does it mean, just average residential rate rise? Average of what, or where, or how? I can't get that.
Sarah?
Through the Mayor. We've actually been measuring this for the current corporate plan since 2016, and it's something that's in currently the annual plan. We actually put that in the annual plan every year. So I'll give you the technical definition. It's the percentage increase in total rates and charges for a residential non-community title property dwelling being principal place of residence paying the average general rate, but it excludes things like water charges and other specialist charges. So it's something we've been calculating and reporting on since 2016.
I get that. That's the average residential rates. Yes. Rise when we actually introduce it, and that's the description of it. But in a document like this, where we're indicating our measures of success or whatever, I just don't think it means anything.
Okay, I think, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I can help. So what this table does is describe what the measure is. So that's describing, and Sarah's just described, it will be a number. Behind there is a target, and we know on this one, we all know what the target is, which is an average residential rate rise less than CPI. That's what the target is underneath. So we'll report, that describes the number, which will be 4, 5, 3, whatever it is every year, but the target behind it is very clear, which is less than CPI. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yes, through the Mayor, that's correct. So in terms of our baseline, last year I think it was 1.68%. Yep. We have been recording this for many years, and you're right, that's what will be reported in the annual report. And the measures of success, which are attachment 6, give a bit more definition, and that will be provided on the website to the community.
Sorry, through you, Mayor, notwithstanding that, I think we could probably clean the language up, Deputy, if that helps.
No, it's fine. If everyone else is happy, it's fine.
All right. Well, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So through you to CEO. So on this one again, and we did raise this one city, I think at our last meeting. If I think about the issues we've had in terms of one city, well, since I've been here, I think, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the intent of this, but I thought it was about partnering together everyone in the city to forward this city, so state and federal. And if I think about the issues that we've had, both federal and state, there's nothing in that, there's no measures in that that would reflect that we are actually working and that we're succeeding. It doesn't speak to one city, those measures. It doesn't speak to it in the... Could we put it back up on the screen, please? So could you just expand it a bit, please? I get the emerging opportunities, but we've had so many frustrations with how we're dealing with other levels of government, and that's what I thought that meant, that we work out ways to work together for the city. So is that accurate or not? Because those words do not reflect that, if that is what it's meant to be.
We can't bind state and federal. But in the advocacy, we do our best and to get infrastructure or other fundings, and reflective of through 2015, say, before the couple of years before the Commonwealth Games till now, we've absolutely punched above our weight regarding funding from the federal and the state. To the extent, every time I go to council of mayors, they're all whining that how much we get in comparison to the other councillors. But, you know, because those things are beyond our control, and I've got to go cap in hand to negotiate. We can't bind them, so I don't think we could measure it until we got the result.
I appreciate that, but there's one word you said in there which I think is very important, and that was infrastructure. And that to me, there's no sense in that one city that we're talking about partnering together to enhance or increase our infrastructure. So it just, I don't know. If I see what I thought was the gap and what we're talking about the gap, that still doesn't fit the brief for me. It relates to a couple of special project elements, but I don't.
Well, can I say that it's enough for me to go and get more money from the state and federal? Okay. Right, Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 100, at the top part, it's highlighting the inclusion of light rail, and I'm just wondering why it hasn't been just public transport overall.
Oh, it's in the picture.
Sorry, can I just check which page? Page
100?
100.
In order to help, I think it's referring to the train being added to the picture, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, in terms of the visual, the light rail was added to the visual because obviously it's an iconic part of our transport network in the city. I'm sorry, I missed the second part of the question there, Councillor McDonald.
Well, I would have thought that it would just have said public transport, overall.
In the visual?
So for Councillor, if I can help through you, Mr Mayor, so that's just a description of the change in the picture.
Yeah.
So the light rail has gone in as a representative for public transport because it is probably the most iconic piece of public transport we have in the city. So that's why it's there.
Okay. Well, councillors, how about we take a break while we get item 8 onto that? Like magic, it's there. But it's not. Is it an amendment to number 7?
Yeah, sorry, Mr Mayor. So just as debate went on, and I was trying to pick up on some of your undertakings to our colleagues, I thought the best way of hoovering up all the feedback was to create a new A, B and C under 4 and a new A under 7.
Okay. How about I'll leave to everyone to have a look at that while we have another 10 minutes good enough?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, all good. 10 minutes. 12:16. streaming on and on the screen. I'll go to Councillor Vorster. Could you...
I'm happy to move that, Mr Mayor.
Move, Councillor Vorster. Seconder, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Forster, can you speak on that, especially about the yellow?
Would you like me to stand to speak to it, Mr Mayor?
I think it'd be good for the camera.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as you'd be aware and all of our colleagues would be aware, we have a statutory obligation to deliver a corporate plan, which is an overarching governance document to make sure that the decisions that we make as a council are in accordance with the aspirations and the wishes of the community. Now, at very short notice, city officers and our new CEO have worked very well to gather as much community insight as possible to inform a better corporate plan that can take us forward to 2027. Mr Mayor, during the latter stages of our corporate plan development, we invited the Gold Coast community to provide some further information, some further guidance to us. That was captured in about 1,000 submissions, about 950 of which came from within the city. Now, based on the strength of those submissions, city officers have recommended a few changes to the corporate plan that was initially presented to us in draft form. Upon reflection, though, Mr Mayor, what I believe the most prudent course of action is to slightly amend those proposed changes by city officers to manage community expectations. And when I say that, it's not about passing the buck or passing the ball, but making it very clear to the community how their feedback will be used in decision making. And in order to provide that clarity, Mr Mayor, I'm proposing a change adding a 4A, which reads that the corporate plan and associated collateral be amended to reflect the inherent tension between competing priorities and that decisions will be balanced and reflect the public interest. Mr Mayor, it'd be great if we could have a report or a council decision that ticked absolutely every box in the corporate plan. That would be wonderful. But we do know that every decision has trade-offs. And what's really important is for us to communicate to the community that we will take all information in, that we will make balanced decisions, and we will attempt to get decisions correct. But what we don't want to do is be in a position where decisions are not being made, decisions in the public interest, merely because not every box is ticked. This amendment, Mr Mayor, is based on some feedback that we received during the course of questioning and debate from our CEO, that sometimes there are different priorities that are in competition, but they need to be reconciled in the public interest. Mr Mayor, I further propose a change adding a Part B to 4, which reads that the corporate plan and associated collateral be amended to instead reflect a greater emphasis on climate resilience and tactical policy outcomes to deliver genuine environmental outcomes. And Mr Mayor, I feel very strongly that we should make this amendment because, as we've heard already, there is so much that we are doing already in the space, whether it's planting hundreds of thousands of trees, whether it's developing new flood overlay codes, whether it's by extracting methane from landfill, installing solar voltaic panels on our community centres. There's so much that we're already doing that we know actually delivers environmental outcomes. And Councillor William Owen Jones referred to our investment in public transport. Absolutely, a project that delivers better environmental outcomes. And it would be a shame, Mr Mayor, not to reflect that as one of the priorities of our corporate plan, because that actually delivers results. It's not aspirational, it's actually delivery. So we need to capture all of that work and ensure that the organisation focuses on those initiatives that will actually make a meaningful difference to the way our environment copes. Lastly, Mr Mayor, with respect to 4C, I propose adding that the citywide greenhouse gas emissions outcome, so we're retaining it completely, be subject to further development and will be informed by Commonwealth and state government policies as they are settled. And Mr Mayor, what this does is signal to the community that we are interested in developing a greenhouse gas emissions policy. Absolutely, we are interested in that, but we want to make sure that that policy is actually in full alignment with the Commonwealth and state government. As we saw with the so-called wheelie bin tax, Mr Mayor, the state waste levy, we needed alignment between council's approach and the state approach to ensure that ratepayers weren't disadvantaged and that we were actually delivering on the state's environmental ambitions. As the new Commonwealth Government and the state settle on their approach, this will be a trigger to review our position to make sure that there's alignment, and where there are subsidies and grants available, we can factor that into our policy moving forward. I just want to stress to any councillor who's weary that this waters down the corporate plan and its commitment to action on greenhouse gas emissions. It does not do that. What it signals to the community is that there is more work to be done, and that work will be in consultation with the two other levels of government. And Mr Mayor, just lastly, I propose to add a new part to 7, which reads as follows: that the Chief Executive Officer review the approach to community consultation ahead of the next annual review to improve representation of all communities and to improve statistical reliability. Now, Mr Mayor, perhaps none of the themes that were presented through this last round of consultation were a surprise, but what was a surprise to me is that in the West, well, they only constituted 3% of all submissions. And I think we need to properly resource, retool, reorganise a community consultation team if required to make sure that every Gold Coaster has an opportunity to participate in the decisions that affect them. And this decision, a corporate plan, is the most important because every policy, every strategy, every decision we make must align with it. So every year, perhaps we have an opportunity to check in with the community and make sure that we get the balance right. Mr Mayor, other than that, very happy with the report, and I'd like to thank Sarah and the corporate planning and performance team, our corporate communication branch, and the CEO, who at a very late stage, 5 minutes to midnight, as I say, had an opportunity to be involved and landed us, I think, in a very strong position. Thank you.
Speaking against the motion, Councillor Peter Young.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I probably won't be as eloquent as Councillor Vorster on this matter, as indeed with others, but I do sense a watering down of the intent that was developed as a result of community engagement and feedback from the community and the general public about a corporate plan, and that's informed the measures that were brought forward to us today to consider. And I believe that people want action on both climate resilience and mitigation, and we seem to be all on the same page about that in the sense of reducing the threat that we might experience in the city with our infrastructure or public infrastructure generally, or private infrastructure as well. However, it seems that the broader public may have a different aspiration in the sense of reducing our footprint, reducing our carbon emissions, and indeed this council did have a climate change strategy adopted in 2014, and that included a target to achieve carbon neutral outcome for the city's operations, I mean the council's operations, by 2020. So there was nothing scary in any of that at that point in time, and I don't think there's anything scary in that. I think it's just good business for us to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions from our sewage plants, for example, from our vehicles, from our electricity usage. And I think that we do those things, and so it seems a shame that we're not actually recognising that and adopting that as part of a deliberate, open strategy. This is what we want to do, and we're doing it, and we can achieve great outcomes. As I said, we're already doing a lot of those things. I think it's good business, and our directors are taking the lead and ensuring that we're getting the best outcomes, because it's a financial benefit to us, but it's also a recognition, and I don't want to be political because I had this discussion with my colleague, Councillor Brooks, during the break. This is, for me, isn't about politics. It's about recognising that we individually, as people and as a community, can influence the global outcomes, the global emissions, and we have a role and a responsibility, I believe, to do whatever we can in our well-resourced community to achieve the best outcomes, and I mean to reduce our carbon emissions to a neutral basis. We've got that capacity, and I think it's our obligation. Hence, I won't be able to support this because I do sense it is watering down those objectives, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Speaking for the motion, Councillor Owen Jones.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to support it because I don't think it waters it down. I think it basically gives us some practical direction to go in. And as we discussed during questions, there's a whole raft of things that the city already does that people may not necessarily directly link to climate change or climate resilience, but they're actually practical things that the city is doing, whether or not it is in how we manage our landfill and and the extraction of gases from old cells, whether or not it's how many trees that we seek to plant or how much of the city we seek to have under canopy, whether or not it is the simple things where we try to have a mode shift, getting people out of cars and either walking or cycling or using public transport. And we don't do that by ourselves. We do it in partnership with other levels of government. So, for example, when it comes to mode shift and getting people out of cars, the city, before I was a councillor, made a decision to basically invest an enormous amount of money in light rail, in the first stage of light rail. And that decision was made, and subsequently we've invested in stages 2 and 3 of light rail. And we've talked a lot in this chamber about trying to make that business as usual, because that stops the city spreading out and starts concentrating growth in adjacent to public transport. And that's what actually makes a difference. When people say to myself as a councillor, what are we doing about climate change? To me, the simple answer about trying to influence how people get out of their cars and maybe are able to get to their close destinations is one of the very practical things that we do. So, Mr Mayor, it was also mentioned that the flood overlay codes, and then what wasn't mentioned was we've done an enormous amount of work in regards to bushfire management and the hazards involved with that. That's all part of our responsibility as a local government of aiming towards being resilient into the future. And if we can encourage other levels of government to invest in delivering some of those outcomes for our city based on what we're doing, that to me is a positive thing, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Speaking against the motion, Councillor Tozer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is nothing in particular in this motion that offends me, and I actually think I've heard the debate and the conversation here, but my position is actually informed by the broader conversation that we had earlier. And I have to say that in the residents that I look after, I'm in the south category. The first most important issue is environmental protection. The fourth most important issue is climate change resilience and planning. And it just occurs to me, not by the words that are on the screen, but by the debate that has occurred, that there is a sense that some of those issues we may be less attentive to those. The underlying emphasis in the debate, I think, led me to believe that. So I actually also think that A, B and C are relatively self-evident in the officer's recommendation. I actually don't think there's anything in those 3 elements that perhaps wouldn't form part of the CEO's delegation anyway. And I have full confidence that our new CEO has taken on board the debate today. I feel confident that 4 in itself actually does deliver and will deliver the feeling of council and our commitment to climate change resilience and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and the broader actions that are happening across the city well beyond reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I have full confidence that the CEO will actually deliver on those things. Frankly, I'm just not convinced, based on the debate, that A, B and C add any extra value to what is already inherently in 4. I'll be voting against the motion, Mr Mayor.
Okay. All right. Councillor, it's not speaking. Okay. Can I go? You close it? Yeah, Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I fully respect the CEO, and I'd like to thank the CEO for his contribution during debate, because it's actually the CEO's contribution which informed the words that I've placed up on the screen today. So for any councillor who may worry or have some consternation around the words, I think they can take some comfort in that they're a product of feedback that we've received from the top table, but also discussion that's been had amongst representatives of the city. And I think surveys play an important role in decision making. Absolutely they do. But when a survey only captures 3% of submissions from 1/4 of the city, we need to plug that gap as community representatives. And I feel as though that gap is plugged through debate, through constructive dialogue with the CEO across the floor, and in the amendment of the motion. And while it is tempting to rely on the CEO to act on the debate, that's actually not what we're here to do. I believe that as councillors, we're not here to put out a vibe, we're here to make decisions. And the only way that we make binding decisions is through the words that are captured in a recommendation. Mr Mayor, I just want, even though perhaps Councillor Young and Councillor Tozer may choose to vote against this today, I just want to make it patently clear to anybody listening in here, listening online, that these words do not undermine whatsoever council action on greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the city officer recommendation was silent on greenhouse gas emissions. The decision of committee today is to insert greenhouse gas emissions into the recommendation and to actually give the CEO direction to act on that outcome by placing it under his delegation. So far from watering down action, it actually strengthens action. But Mr Mayor, we have, I think, in times gone by, so many plans and policies that have sat on a shelf and done nothing. They've gathered dust. What this does, Mr Mayor, a combination of B and C, is actually direct city officers to get on with the job of achieving good environmental outcomes the moment that this is adopted. It tells them to get on with that. But it also tells them to get on to the Commonwealth Government and the state government to develop a policy that we can consider when the time is right. The last thing I want to do is break faith with the community, and I feel as though we break faith when we make a commitment with no policy. This makes it clear that we've got a commitment and that we will work towards a policy. It's about being honest and transparent, managing expectations, and also providing direction to city officers that we will get the job done when we have more information. And lastly, Mr Mayor, any councillor, I feel, who does not support this actually imperils our ability to deliver a more robust review in 12 months' time. Because in my personal view, it was one of the failings of our consultation approach that only 3% of submissions came from the West. And if I were representing the West, I would want to make sure that the next corporate plan gathered as many contributions and as many submissions from that community as possible. But that is only achieved if this resolution is carried, because Part 7A reads that the Chief Executive Officer review the approach to community consultation ahead of the next review to improve representation. If you want improved representation and not just to rely on a survey, one survey in one moment in time, you need to support this. For all of those reasons, Mr Mayor, I think this amended resolution is worth supporting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, just of note or heads up, we can't pass a motion to adopt a budget without first passing a motion to have a council corporate plan. So what I'm saying here is that should this go down, we won't be able to adopt the budget at the budget day, and of course we've got till, I think from memory, end of July, August, whatever, I think end of July, but there's no passage for our budget. I thought I'd make that point clear. The debate's closed. Okay, foreshadow the officer's recommendation. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show his hand. Division.
Councillor Tate, Councillor Rowan Jones, Councillor Gates, Councillor Corwell, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Bartolomé, Councillor Castro, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Forster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill.
Against?
Councillor Hamill, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Tozer and Councillor McDonald.
Motion carried. Next item is 7.1. councillors go to page 125. I move that we go into close. Reason, the local government budget. Seconder, Councillor Gates. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. streaming on. Right. So 7.1, am I right, Joe? Okay. All right, 7.1 on page 125. I move the draft budget documentation be referred to adoption to the special council meeting to be held on the 14th of June 2022. Seconder, Councillor Peter Young. Anyone speak against the motion? Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, carry, unanimous. We go into 7.2. Minute taker, if you can just, sorry? No, just going to talk to minute taker. Could you note? All right. Councillor Tozer, move. Okay, seconder, Councillor Lacastra. Anyone want to speak against? Councillor Tozer, you would like to close?
Mr Mayor, this item relates to the generous position that Council takes in relation to incorporated associations and those community organisations who do wonderful work in our community. And whilst it's only a very small part of our budget deliberations, it's an important part. And yeah, it's good. We're going to write to everyone and tell them how much we're giving them. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Absolutely. Councillors, put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. On this, so Joe, is there any other items? There's not? All right. There's no other item, unless you're reading an older agenda. There's 7.3.
Just grabbing the camera. Sorry. Mr Mayor.
Yes, of course.
Success of last.
All right. All right. Okay, councillors. Okay, what we'll do is we'll close the meeting at 13:02.